We're going to start talking about section 1.2. It's parabolas in vertex form as well as intercept form. Vertex form is what's given. Y equals a, x minus h, quantity squared plus k. What happens is, if a is positive, the parabola opens upward. If a is negative, the parabola would open downward. So let's do an example. We're going to make up an example here. Y equals 2 times x minus 3 quantity squared plus 1. So let me mark off some marks on my graph. Okay, I'll write under above it y equals a. Is a positive or is a negative? A is positive, so that means it's going to open upward. And I'm sorry, I put k twice. It's x minus h. Can anybody tell me what h is? Be careful because the negative is in the equation. I always think what makes this 0? So that would be 3, right? H is 3. What's k? 1. So 3, 1 is where the vertex is. And it's going to open upward. If you want to take that little quick shortcut I showed you, a is 2. That means I would go up 2 and over 1. Which I think if I went up 2 over 1 would change the y value, x value by 1, and the y value by 2, I think. So we'd have a parabola like this. I usually ask for the vertex and 2 symmetric points. If I went 1 to the left from 3, I think I would be at 2, and I would have the same y value, 3 here. Anyway, that's an example of a parabola in vertex form. If they ever ask for the axis of symmetry, it's always going to be x equals the x coordinate. In this case, x equals h. So the h is 3. Okay, we're going to look at example number 1. Okay, again, this is y equals a, x minus h, quantity squared plus k. Because a is negative, that means it's going to open downward. H is whatever makes this equal 0, so that's negative 2, comma, k is 5. So your vertex is going to be at negative 2, 5, somewhere around here. Negative 2, 5. And it's going to open downward. Now, if I went down 1 and over 4, that would make it a very wide parabola. Down 1 over 4 would make this a very wide parabola. The axis of symmetry would be x equals negative 2. The axis of symmetry is this imaginary axis that if you folded it on, the parabola should match up. I don't have it sketched as well as I should, but it's just very wide. Okay, this is the intercept form in 1-2, where you have a. Again, if a is positive, it will open upward. I'm sorry, if a is greater than 0, it's going to open upward. If a is negative, it's going to open downward. This means that P and Q are what are called x-intercepts. Let me do an example if I can. Okay, we're going to look at example 3 from the textbook. y equals 2 times the quantity of x plus 3 times the quantity of x minus 1. Okay, what this means is, what value well, because a is positive, we know it's going to open upward. What value makes this 0? Negative 3. That's what's called the x-intercept. So I know it's going to go through negative 3, 0. What value makes this other part 0? That would be 1. So I know it's going to go through 1, 0. So I know it goes through here and here. How far is it from negative 3 to 1? Well, from negative 3 to 1 is 4. If I went 2 in each direction, where would my vertex be? It would be on this line, x equals negative 1. 2 bigger makes 1, 2 smaller makes negative 3. What would you get if you put a negative 1 in? What is negative 1 plus 3 and negative 1 minus 1? What is that going to make y equal? That'd be 2 and negative 2. I think that'd be what, a negative 8? Am I wrong? So I think I'm going to redo my graph. Bear with me a moment. Okay, I've redone my graph a little bit. What made this first part 0 was negative 3. So I know it goes through negative 3, 0. What made this part 0 was 1. So I know it goes through 1, 0. When I put in a negative 1, I get out a negative 8. So negative 1, negative 8 is the vertex. And this is going to open upward. It's called the intercept form because you can kind of tell what the x-intercepts are simply from what makes each of these factors equal 0. Okay, the homework in section 1.2 in Algebra 2 Honors would be 3 to 31 odds. Here is just a sampling, a couple questions in each section. This is what's called vertex form. Vertex form is y equals a, which happens to be a 1, x minus h, which happens to be, so h would be a 3, plus k. K in this case would be plus 0. So the vertex is 3, 0. A is positive, which means it opens upward. So I'm going to go to 3, 0. And I'm going to have my parabola opening upward. I believe by following the instructions, it says label the vertex, which would be 3, 0, and label the axis of symmetry, which would be this imaginary line that you could fold it on to match them up. Well, the axis of symmetry is always x equals the x-coordinate of your vertex, or x equals h. So we graphed it, and we sketched a graph at least, and we labeled the vertex and axis of symmetry just like the instructions asked us to. So I may move on to the next one. It's going to be choosing them randomly. Here is 7. Again, y equals a, because a is negative means it opens down. Because it's bigger than 1, it's going to be narrow, or the absolute value of a. Going to be narrow. I know it's x minus h, so I believe the h would be a 2. Plus k, it means that k is going to be 4. That's going to be your vertex. So the vertex is going to be at 2, 4, and it's going to open downward. So I'm going to mark off 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to label my vertex 2, 4, and I'm going to realize that it opens downward. So it's going to open downward. Oops, not a very good parabola. A little better. And the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is this imaginary line. and it is always x equals h. So it's going to be x equals 2. Okay, from 7, I think our next one is kind of like 13. This is called intercept form. You look for what makes each of these 0, so that would be -3 and +3. That's where it's going to hit the x-axis. -3 and +3. So I'll mark off -3 and +3. Exactly halfway between them would be 0. If you put in 0, you would get out a -9. So I know the vertex is going to be down here at 0, -9. And it's going to be opening upward because the A is positive. They want us to give you the intercepts, the vertex, all labeled, and the axis of symmetry. In other words, the axis you could fold it on and match up the points. In this case, the y-axis, or x equals 0. It's always x equals the x-coordinate of the vertex. Okay, after 13, I think I have 19. A again is positive, so I know it's going to open upward. What makes this 0 is -1. What makes this 0 is when x is -2. Those are called the x-intercepts, and we know that it's opening upward. So I'm going to mark off -1, -2, and so forth. So it's going to hit at -2, 0, and it's going to hit at -1, 0. I know it opens upward. What's exactly halfway between these? Would it be -1.5? -1.5? And I'm going to plug that in to find the vertex and the axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry is going to be x equals the x value of the vertex. To find the y value, everybody understands how I got -3/2? It's between -4/2 and -2/2. Halfway would be -3/2, -1.5. Okay, now I'm going to plug in to find what y equals. Y equals something plus 1, something plus 2. And I'm putting in 1 and 1/2. So that makes 3/2 plus 2/2, which is 5/2. This is 3/2. I think 2 could be called 4/2. That makes that 7/2. Top times top is 35. Bottom times bottom is 4. So the vertex is going to be at, let me just see what we have. Oh, I didn't put in a negative, did I? Should be a -3/2 that I'm plugging in, isn't it? So that's going to change my result here. -3/2 plus 2/2 is a -1/2. What's -3/2 plus 4/2? I think it's a +1/2, isn't it? And when I multiply these, I get y equals -1/4. So that's the y value of the vertex. Okay, I'm going to move on. We have number 25. This is another one where it's in vertex form. What makes this 0? What makes this 0 is going to be your intercept. So it's going to be x equals 5 and x equals -3. Because A is a +1 means it will open upward. So I have to make my intercepts at 5 and -3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, negative 3, 0. What is halfway between, how far is it from negative 3 to 5? Is the distance 8? Half of that is 4. If you came in 4 from 5, would you be at 1? And if you added 4 to negative 3, would you be at 1? That happens to be what's called the axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry will be x equals 1. Now, if I put a 1 in, it will give me the y value of the vertex. So bear with me. I'm now going to plug in the x as a 1. And what does that give me for y? I think that would be negative 4 times 4. Is that right? So y would be a negative 16. So way down here, you would have the vertex at 1, comma, negative 16. And this would be opening upward. So I've labeled the vertex, the axis of symmetry, and my two x-intercepts. Okay, I guess it helps to read the instructions first. Here's a case where they do not ask for a graph. All they ask for it is in standard form. So I don't need any of this. They didn't ask for a graph. They asked for it in standard form. In other words, distribute this out. I would much rather you call it distribution than foiling. FOIL only works for binomials times binomials. X times x gives me x squared. X times 3 gives me 3x. Take this as a negative 5 times x is negative 5x. And negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Most times the two middle terms will combine. I think in this case it gives me negative 2x. And this should be what's called in standard form now. Standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So I should be in standard form. All we really had to do was just distribute this out. And I believe it's the same thing in 31. 31 has an x plus 3 quantity squared. X plus 3 quantity squared. Does that mean times itself? This is for the next one I'm doing. Could you write it out twice and distribute? X times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 3 is 9. Combining the middle two terms gives you this. Now, I would rather you learn the shortcut, which is the following. Square the first, square the last, multiply them and double it. 3x doubled is 6x. You'll notice you can get the same answer a little faster that way. On standardized tests, that makes a difference. So, x plus 3 quantity squared is involved in this next question I'm doing. So, if I know what I'm doing, I could just simply square the first, square the last, multiply these, that's 3x, and double it, 6x. Now when I distribute this 5, that would be 5x squared plus 30x plus 45, I think, and then minus 4. So you'd end up with 5x squared plus 30x, and I think plus 40. Again, it's just distributing and cleaning it up.